Welcome back, deep divers. Today, we're gonna explore something a little different. We're gonna be diving into the world of business failures.
Ooh, sounds a bit morbid, doesn't it?
Well, maybe, but it's also incredibly insightful. And to guide us on this deep dive, we're turning to Scott Fearon and his book, Dead Companies Walking.
Fearon, the hedge fund manager.
Exactly. He's built a career out of spotting these dead companies walking before they even hit the ground.
So, like, he can predict which businesses are headed for disaster.
That's the idea. He's developed a sort of sixth sense for it.
Okay, but what makes his approach unique? I mean, there are lots of analysts out there trying to predict the future of companies.
Right, but Fearon goes beyond just crunching numbers. He actually spends years meeting with CEOs, visiting factories, even opened his own restaurant once, to really understand what makes businesses tick,
Yeah.
or stop ticking, as the case may be.
So he doesn't just look at the balance sheet, he looks at the whole picture.
Exactly, and he's distilled all that experience into what he calls the 6 deadly business sins.
6 deadly sins, huh? Sounds ominous.
It is a bit dramatic. But the point is, these aren't just abstract ideas. He brings them to life with real stories from his career. Some of them are actually quite hilarious, but most of them serve as cautionary tales.
And he's willing to talk about his own failures, too.
Oh, absolutely. He's the first to admit he's made his fair share of mistakes. But that's how we learn,
Well,
right?
It's about understanding what went wrong so you can avoid those pitfalls in the future.
Exactly. So, are you ready to explore these sins?
Hit me with the first one.
Okay, the first one might surprise you. It's something we all do. Getting stuck in the recent past. Fearon calls it historical myopia.
Interesting. What does that mean exactly?
Well, he uses this story about Global Marine, an oil rig company back in the 1986 oil crash. Imagine those massive oil rigs, and suddenly the price of oil just plummets. What would you do?
I'd panic, probably. But what do they do?
Global Marine thought they had it all figured out. They had this key metric, a rig utilization rate, and it had always stayed above a certain level, at least in recent history. So they based their entire strategy on that.
Okay, so what's the problem? Sounds like a solid plan, if it's always worked before.
Yeah, but they forgot one crucial thing. Oil prices can be volatile. They can go up and down, sometimes dramatically.
So their mistake was assuming the past would always predict the future.
Precisely. They were so focused on the good times, the recent good times, they completely missed the warning signs of a major downturn.
Driving a business by only looking in the rearview mirror. That's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. And this historical myopia, it's not limited to oil rigs either. We see it in the stock market all the time.
Oh yeah, investors chasing the latest trend, assuming it'll go up forever.
Right. They forget to look at the bigger picture, the historical context.
So lesson number one, don't let the recent past blind you. Look at the long-term trends and don't be afraid to question assumptions.
Exactly. Okay, ready for sin number 2.
Let's hear it.
This one's about clinging too tightly to a formula for success. And Fearon uses the story of Value Merchants, a dollar store chain, to illustrate this.
Seller stores. They're everywhere.
That was their strategy, actually, to double the number of stores every year.
Sounds good on paper. More scores, more profit, right?
Except they didn't seem too concerned about whether there is actually demand for all those new stores.
Wait, so they were just opening stores without considering whether people would shop there?
Pretty much. Fearon describes this almost comical scene of unsold merchandise being shuffled from one failing store to another. Like they thought if they just kept opening stores, the customers would magically appear.
Wow, that's some serious faith in the formula.
It is. But they forgot that every market is different. What works in one place might not work in another.
Right. You need to be flexible, be adaptable.
Exactly. You have to respond to what the market's telling you.
Okay, so lesson number 2. Don't be a slave to the formula.
Right. Now, Fearon also talks about this company, Advanced Marketing Services. They ultimately failed despite the CDO's insane work ethic. This guy was a machine, working tirelessly. But he was so focused on following the process, he missed all the warning signs that things weren't working.
So even if you're working hard, you need to be working smart.
Exactly. You have to constantly be assessing, adjusting, questioning your assumptions, even when they seem to be working.
So we've got companies getting blinded by the recent past, clinging to formulas.
Mhm.
What's the next trap?
This one might hit close to home for a lot of people. Misreading or even alienating your customers.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
And Fearon actually gets personal with this one. He shared his own experience opening a Cajun restaurant in Marin County, California.
Cajun food in Marin County. That's an interesting combination.
Right. Picture this. Spicy, down-home Louisiana cooking in one of the most affluent, health-conscious counties in California.
I can already see where this is going.
Yeah. Fearon admits he was blinded by his passion. He just assumed everyone else would love Cajun food as much as he did.
So he didn't really do his homework, didn't understand his target audience?
Nope. He didn't do the market research. And let's just say the restaurant wasn't exactly a culinary triumph.
What happened? Did it close?
Oh, yeah, it closed.
Yeah.
But he learned a valuable lesson from it. You can't just assume people want what you want.
Build it and they will come doesn't always work.
Not always. You have to really understand your customer.
Okay, lesson 3. Know your customer.
Exactly. Now, speaking of getting caught up in your own vision, that brings us to deadly sin number 4.
Okay, lay it on me.
Falling victim to a mania. And Fearon uses the story of Planet Arcs, a company from the .com era that was going to revolutionize how people buy prescription drugs.
Oh yeah, the .com boom. Lots of big dreams back then.
They had this huge vision, right? This potentially massive market. But they seem to overlook some pretty basic practical stuff.
Like what?
Well, Fearon's own father, a seasoned businessman, pointed it out right away. He said, how are you going to convince older people who are used to getting their prescriptions at the local pharmacy to suddenly trust a website with their medication?
That's a good point. It's a big change.
Right. It's what we call irrational exuberance. Everyone gets caught up in the hype and forgets to look at the fundamentals.
And was Planet RX a success?
Well, let's just say they eventually relocated to Memphis.
Ouch, I think I get the picture. Lesson 4, don't get swept up by the hype.
Exactly. Ask the tough questions, especially when everyone else seems to be drinking the Kool-Aid.
Good advice. Now, what about those other 2 sins? What do we got left?
Well, those are pretty big ones, so let's save those for part 2. We wouldn't want to overwhelm our listeners now, would we?
Good point. We'll dive into those next time.
Okay, so we've covered 4 of Fearon's 6 deadly business sins. Companies getting blinded by the recent past, clinging to outdated formulas, misreading their customers, and getting caught up in market manias.
Yeah, those are some pretty big pitfalls to avoid.
Yeah.
But, what I find interesting is that each of these sins, as Fearon calls them, they offer a valuable lesson.
Absolutely. They highlight common mistakes that businesses, even really smart businesses, can make.
And by understanding those mistakes, we can be better prepared to navigate the business world.
Exactly. Whether we're running a company, investing in one, or just trying to make sense of it all. So, ready to dive into the next sin?
Hit me with it. What's number 5?
All right. Sin number 5 is all about the importance of adapting to change, especially those massive changes that can reshape an entire industry.
Ah, those tectonic shifts, as they say.
Yeah, Fearon uses a great example for this one. Blockbuster Video.
Blockbuster. Wow, that takes me back. Remember those blue and gold stores? It seemed like they were everywhere.
They were, and they practically owned the video rental market. But then this little company called Netflix came along.
Ah, Netflix, the disruptor.
Exactly. They started mailing DVDs to people's homes. And Blockbuster, well, they just didn't see the threat. Or maybe they just didn't want to.
They were too comfortable with their business model, I guess.
Right. They were so focused on their brick-and-mortar stores, their late fees, even their candy selection.
Candy.
Seriously.
Yeah. Fearon even tells the story about how Blockbuster considered selling more candy as a way to stay afloat. It's almost funny in a sad kind of way.
Like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Exactly. They completely missed the boat on streaming while Netflix was building the future.
But didn't Blockbuster try to launch their own online service eventually?
They did, but it was way too late. The market had moved on.
So what's the lesson here?
I think the key takeaway is that adaptability is crucial. The businesses that thrive are the ones that can sense those tectonic shifts, those major changes happening around them, and adapt.
They're the ones that are willing to evolve. Right. Even if it means completely changing their own business model. Look at the companies winning today, the Amazons, the Googles of the world. They're constantly innovating, constantly adapting.
It's like that saying, the only constant is change.
It's true. And if you're not changing, you're probably falling behind.
Now that brings us to Fearon's final deadly sin, right? What is it?
This one is a bit more subtle, but it can be just as dangerous. It's about being physically or emotionally removed from your company's operations.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does that work?
Fearon uses the story of this company Building Materials Holding Corporation to illustrate this sin. They supplied building materials, like the stuff that goes into houses, bridges, the physical world.
Okay, got it. Building materials. So what's the problem?
Well, the problem was their executives were pretty removed from the actual business of building. They had these luxurious offices overlooking San Francisco Bay.
Nice, yeah, I bet. But yeah, not exactly close to the construction site.
Right. They were miles away, both literally and figuratively, from where the real work was happening.
And what was the impact of that?
Well, Fearon met with the CEO, and he was struck by how disconnected the CEO seemed from the day-to-day challenges of the business. They were focused on appearances, on projecting an image of success.
But they weren't really in touch with what was happening on the ground.
Exactly. And that's the danger of being emotionally detached. You lose touch with the core of your business, with your employees, with your customers. You can't make good decisions if you're not in touch with reality.
Makes sense. So how can leaders avoid this trap? How do they stay connected?
Well, Fearon suggests a few things. First, get out of the office.
That sounds like good advice for all of us.
Right. Don't just rely on reports and spreadsheets. Go visit the factories, the stores, wherever the work is happening. Talk to your employees, your customers.
Be present, be visible.
Exactly. It's about showing that you care, that you're engaged.
It's about fostering a culture of communication.
Yes. Where information flows freely up and down the chain of command. Create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing their ideas, their concerns, because often the people closest to the action have the best insights.
They're the ones who can tell you what's really working and what's not.
Exactly. They can help you spot those warning signs before they turn into major problems.
So stay connected, stay informed, stay engaged.
Right. And remember, even the best leaders can fall into these traps.
That's why it's so important to be aware of them.
Exactly. Awareness is the first step towards avoiding those pitfalls and building a truly successful and sustainable business. So we've talked a lot about what not to do in business, about those pitfalls that can lead to a company's demise. But Fearon's book isn't all doom and gloom.
Right, it's not all cautionary tales.
Exactly. He also highlights some inspiring success stories, companies that not only survived but thrived even in the face of adversity.
And it's interesting, isn't it? These companies, they didn't achieve success by playing it safe.
No, they were willing to take risks, to innovate, even to disrupt their own industries. In fact, one could argue that they succeeded because of that willingness to embrace change and even failure as part of the process.
It's like that saying, fail fast, fail often.
Exactly. Let's talk about IGT, for example.
IGT.
You might not recognize the name, but you've definitely seen their products. They make slot machines.
Ah, slot machines.
Okay. And back in the 1980s, they were struggling big time, facing bankruptcy, actually.
Wow, really? So how did they turn things around?
Well, they were getting crushed by cheaper competitors. Their stock was plummeting. It looked like the end of the line for IGT.
So what did they do?
Instead of giving up, they decided to double down on innovation. They invested heavily in research and development, and they came up with something revolutionary: the progressive slot machine.
Regressive slot machine? What's that?
These were machines that offered bigger jackpots that grew over time, creating a whole new level of excitement for players. It was a game changer, literally, and it transformed their business.
So they went from almost going bankrupt to dominating the industry.
Yep. And they didn't stop there. They also innovated their business model. They switched from selling machines outright to leasing them to casinos.
Smart move.
It was. It created a steady stream of recurring revenue.
So they turned their whole business around.
They did. It's a great example of how a company can face what seems like an insurmountable challenge and then turn things around by being bold, taking risks, and embracing innovation.
It's a good reminder that sometimes the best way out is through.
Exactly. Now, another company Fearon talks about is Cost Plus. You know them, right?
Yeah, Cost Plus World Market. They have that eclectic mix of home decor, gifts, and those giant tubs of trail mix.
That's the one. Now, Fearon was actually a longtime short seller of their stock. He believed their business model was unsustainable.
Really? What made him think that?
He thought they were expanding too quickly, that their merchandise was becoming too mainstream, that they'd lose their unique appeal.
Was he right?
For a while, he was. Their stock price plummeted. Things looked pretty dire. But then they brought in a new management team, and they made some bold changes.
Like what?
They closed underperforming stores, refocused on their treasure hunt shopping experience, and really emphasized those unique, quirky items that had made them successful in the first place.
Interesting. So they went back to their roots?
They did. And it worked. Their stock price rebounded. They turned the business around. It's amazing how going back to basics, to what made them special, ended up being their saving grace.
It's a good reminder that innovation isn't always about chasing the latest trend. Sometimes it's about remembering what made you successful in the first place.
Exactly. Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to talk about something that really struck me in Fearon's book. It's this idea that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's actually a part of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. You can't have success without some failure along the way.
Right. The companies that thrive are the ones that embrace failure as a learning opportunity. They're not afraid to experiment, to take risks, to make mistakes.
They have that growth mindset.
Exactly. It's about being willing to learn and adapt, seeing setbacks as valuable feedback. And this isn't just about companies, it's about us as individuals too. We shouldn't let the fear of failure hold us back from pursuing our goals.
Right. It's okay to make mistakes. It's how we learn and grow.
Exactly. So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Dead Companies Walking, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to remember that business isn't just about numbers and strategies. It's about people. It's about understanding their needs, their motivations, and their aspirations.
And it's about building businesses that create value, not just for shareholders, but for employees, customers, and communities.
Right. It's about having a positive impact on the world.
Exactly. And it's about having the courage to take risks, to innovate, to adapt, and to never stop learning. Because in the end, the companies and the people who succeed are the ones who embrace the journey with all its twists and turns and unexpected detours. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.